Good evening, everyone, and particularly those who've just braved the rain to come in from outside. Welcome to the Intellectual Forum. My name is Eleanor O'Gorman. I'm the Deputy Director, and we're delighted this evening to be hosting a Cambridge Festival event, which, like the IF, likes to try and bring the Cambridge community together and link to the international community online. So welcome to our audience on Zoom this evening as well. I will just run through some housekeeping before I hand over to our hosts for tonight. In the event of a fire, unlikely, and hopefully the rain would help, you will be directed to the courtyard out here to the right. And also, if you could put your phones on silent or turn them off in deference to the speakers. And I'm missing something else now. Filming. I knew I had F's to cover. Just that the event is being live streamed and will be on YouTube. So if you have a particular dislike of wanting to be on film or for any reason, there are seats here at the front if you'd prefer to sit there, which are out of the view of the camera. So without further ado, I'd love to hand you over to Professor Sarah Colvin, who's a fellow of this college and Schroeder Professor of German, to invite us to a lovely international evening. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you. It's lovely to see everyone in the room, and it's lovely to know that there are people online, even if we can't see you out there. So I'm Sarah Colvin, and as well as being a fellow of this college, which is a very lovely thing to be, and a professor in the university, I'm one of the academics involved in a project which you can see up there in the left-hand corner called Cartography of the Political Novel in Europe. And it's a project that's funded by the EU, and it's funded by UK Research and Innovation. And if you have a drink with us after tonight, that's funded by the German department at the University of Cambridge. So, thank you to all of those people. And it's the research team, the Cambridge research team in that project, who are hosting and running the event tonight. And what the overall project is doing, so we've got colleagues here in the room and colleagues online from Zagreb and from Poznan and from Nicosia and from Brighton. And I've forgotten somewhere. Where did I forget? Berlin, of course. How could I? Professor of German, so I forgot Berlin. And all of us together are engaged in this project to kind of investigate the political and social and cultural heritage, if you like, of the novel in Europe, and looking at how it reflects and maybe sometimes even inflects European societies and politics. And here in Cambridge, the particular job of our research team, noticing that Europe isn't really a very tidy concept. We sometimes try and pretend it is, but actually Europe's very diverse, it's very plural, it always has been, there's lots of movement in and out. And we're looking at what we call travelling knowledge in novels, and how novels are part of moving knowledge around the world, and how they circulate knowledge across class barriers, across time, across space, across communities. And we're kind of also interested in how novels change people's sense of what they know about the world. And the people who'll be leading this and taking you through some ideas this evening are Dr. Talwar Windsor, who is in the green shirt, who's the project postdoctoral researcher, does a lot of important work holding the team together. She's also a cultural historian and a literary expert. And she's supported by Miriam Schwarz, who's finishing her PhD thesis here on narratives of women's friendship. And Miriam's done a chapter for her thesis on Sisters in Arms, so on the novel that we're talking about tonight, and it's appearing imminently as an article, and it's a great piece of work. And we're also, of course, really delighted to welcome Shida Bazyar as our special guest, who wrote Sisters in Arms, which appeared recently in English. It appeared in German in 2021 as Drei Kameradinnen. And there was a novel prior to that, which sadly hasn't been translated into English. So if you're an English speaker, you won't be able to access it. But it was called in German, Nachts ist es leise in Tehran. So at night, it's silent in Tehran. And that novel won a number of prizes, the Ulla Hahn Prize, the Uwe Jonsson Prize. And it was translated, as I said, into quite a lot of languages, but not into English. Whereas Drei Kameradinnen and Sister in Arms has been translated into English, and very wonderfully by Ruth Martin. And I'm not just saying it because I happen to know that Ruth is here tonight, but actually I've read a lot of translations of German novels into English recently, and this one really stood out for me. I think it's a really remarkably engaging English language translation. The novel was nominated for the German Book Prize, and last year Shida won the Ernst Toller Literary Prize in Germany. So I will now leave you to the really interesting part of the evening, which is listening to them.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just checking, yes, my mic's working. Do you two want to just say something quickly to make sure that it's working?
I think it is.
Yep.
Hi, good evening.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks so much to Eleanor and Sarah for introducing us. Just a brief word on the kind of the format of this evening. We're going to start by having a conversation amongst ourselves, questions between us, and then Shida's going to read from the book 2, possibly 3 passages if we've got time, and then there'll be time for questions and answers at the end from the audience. So we're going to start with a kind of a broad question about Shida's writing, and then we're going to jump into the novel in particular. So Shida, Sarah mentioned that Sisters in Arms is your second novel. How would you describe the development in your writing between your 2 novels, and perhaps also how these novels relate to other genres that you've written? So I know you've written short stories, you've written essays. I'm a big fan of your open letters that you've written. Yeah, so if you could reflect a little bit on the kind of the relationship between these books and other types of writing that you've done.
Yeah, I think every time a writer is writing something, or I am writing something, it's some kind of a next step. So you always have in mind what you wrote before, and you're always kind of developing. And it doesn't matter actually if it's a next novel or it's a next shorter piece. I enjoyed during the last years writing essays or shorter pieces because there's also a place for your own opinion or your own attitude. Like there is a place for something like an I or me. And that's something I don't want to put in my novels. I want to write novels about my characters, about their lives, about their daily experiences, but I don't even want to be in my novels as a narrator. And I think in both books, I somehow find a solution for this. I somehow find a way to let the characters speak or let the structure of the novel speak and not be in them. And so I'm writing the 3rd novel at the moment, or I try to write it. And it's still a new problem for me, like, why am I also there? I just want to write. I don't want to be part of a novel. So that's kind of the situation I am at the moment as a writer who's looking at her 2 novels were very, very different, I think, and it depends on the topic, how you build how you create your novel, how you create your book.
And can I just follow up on that and maybe ask whether or not you see yourself as having a particular political or societal role as a writer and as a novelist in particular? Do you think your novels serve a particular or any kind of political function?
Yeah, in Germany, you would always say no. No way, it's not political, and I am not serving anyone. Of course I'm not, but everything is political. So as long as we are living in a world with asymmetrical structures of power, with injustice, it's always political. Who am I and what am I writing? In a world where not every writer can write as free as he or she wants, like my parents came from Iran to Germany. I know the situation of writers in Iran. So how can I sit in Germany and say, I'm a writer, but I'm not political? It's political. And I'm writing as a daughter of immigrants. So I am always seen as not part of the majority. I'm always being, they're othering me. Like when a book is published, even if it's a big publishing house, I'm getting othered by readers, by reviewers. So it makes it political. And that's the one thing. The other thing is that I can't write any page without having the political situation in my mind, because I'm thinking very political. So yes, I think, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we wanted to ask you to maybe introduce a little bit what is the situation of narration in the novel, how does it start, in which situation is the narrator Kasi telling us the story, before we dive in and hear you read from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, The German name of the novel is Drei Kameradinnen, which means like three comrades. So it's about three persons, three women who know each other for a very long time, since their childhood or teenage time. And one of them is Kasi, and she is the narrator of the book. And she writes this whole book during one night and during a few hours, because she's in a very special situation. She is really very angry and wants to describe the last days and also the last years and the time she spends with her friends Saya and Hani. Saya and Hani. And the reason why she has to explain it, why she thinks she has to write it all down, is described in a novel as a newspaper article, which is also seen here. And as you see, the situation is a huge fire, which was in a building. People died, and Saya, one of the three friends, is suspected to start this fire and is in jail at the moment. And that's the reason why Kasi sits down and is waiting for Saya to come back. And she can imagine that everyone who reads these kind of texts just know everything about Saya and is working with all the stereotypes we have. And that's why she's writing. She's kind of answering to an audience which is reading like very racist passages and very racist sentences from persons, and she's answering them and having something like an argument with her audience she's imagining, although nobody's answering, of course. Did I forgot anything to say? It's a bit complex because Kasi is making a development while she is narrating. In the beginning, actually, she says some things that we can get a bit suspicious about her and think, okay, is she really telling the truth? And it became more like thinking about the last day. Saya comes to the city, they're spending time with each other because of the wedding they want to go to. And then at some point we notice, okay, she's changing the stories. She's somehow telling us things she can't really know because she wasn't there, and she's getting more and more like a very powerful, omniscient narrator.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we should hear the first bit that we picked out for tonight, which is a situation in which Kasi and Saya are sitting in a cafe just after Kasi had an appointment at the job center. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe that's everything we need to know. The situation in the job center was very hurtful for Kasi because she had a kind of humiliated or discrimination experience with her. Am I out? It's not working? But why? Is it better now? Yeah, okay. Don't know. You can just stop me when it's happened because I'm not noticing it. A very bad situation in the job center. Saya was accompanying her, and she was trying to start an argument with Frau Suter, the woman working at the job center, but Kasi tried to get out and not to argue with her. And they're sitting at a cafe. I cried as the waitress brought the coffee. And I cried as Saya put an awkward hand on my forearm and said, "Don't cry, that means they've already won," which I didn't even understand. But then I realized that crying was a good thing, because Saya found it disconcerting, and a disconcerted Saya wasn't going to go on any kind of angry rampage. I kept crying, and she stopped ranting, and I imagined Lucas being there. To be honest, that was what made me start crying in earnest, because he wasn't. And because I realized the appointment had been quite a bit shorter than usual, which meant I should really be grateful to Saya. But she'd shown me up. She'd put a dent in the one thing I had going for me, my impeccable behavior in Frau Suter's office. I blew my nose loudly, and it felt good to let it all out. "Okay, now you're sobbing," said Saya. Maybe that's what they teach you when you're training to work in education. State loud and clear what people are currently doing so they feel somehow seen. You're sobbing, and you're quite right to. It's the only rational response. There's a lot to cry about in this country right now. And the other thing I was going to tell you is that I was lying yesterday, obviously. What? The story about the plane. I obviously made it up to avoid upsetting Hani. What did you make up? The woman saying all that stuff so nonchalantly and then it turning out that she wasn't even wearing a real hijab and everyone going, ooh, she's not actually wearing a hijab. That wasn't true. So what really happened? Come on, you know this already, said Saya. And of course, I had known from the start that the story was bullshit. In reality, the woman had sat in the wrong seat despite knowing it was wrong and kept her mouth shut. And everyone, the flight attendant, the other woman in her row of seats, and the people in the queue, had made it clear with their looks and their snorts that the fault must lie with her, must lie in her very existence. No one had helped her with her luggage, and no one had felt ashamed. Saya's flight hadn't been a lesson in how to be a total badass. Actually, what had happened was what always happened. So you had a really cruddy flight and you didn't want to tell Hani? Do you think she's that weak and vulnerable? I thought I'd do Hani a favor and create some peace and harmony myself for a change. And it wasn't really that dramatic, the plane thing. It was just like it always is. I spent the rest of the flight reading. I read and read and read. I couldn't stop, but I didn't want to talk about that. Why not? I asked. Were you reading something obscene? Yeah, the transcripts of those group chats. Oh. I downloaded them all. Can you do that? If you use the right websites, yes. I didn't probe any further. I'd stopped crying, and that was enough. It had become public knowledge 2 days ago. The far-right terrorist group that had been living in the underground for years and had killed Muslims in particular, Muslim women in particular, had a group chat going with other Nazis. She's Nazis chatting, bastards chatting to other bastards, murderers chatting to their accessories. The murderers had been young when they went underground, so the photos of them that were doing the rounds made them look young too, though in reality they were 40-year-old losers with no qualifications who hadn't managed to kill themselves before getting caught. And they must really have had a lot of secret helpers if they'd kept living and killing for all those years without a permanent job or any benefits. But what am I doing here? Why am I telling you about the background of the murdering Nazis? You know all this already. You've heard it before. The papers were full of it a few years ago. And if you didn't hear about it, then I know more about you than you could imagine. I know how wide and how sheltered your lives are, how free of violence, how free of fear. I know you're definitely white people with no history of migration or religious affiliation worth mentioning, because otherwise there's no way you could have been oblivious to this story. It's the most horrific story since your Federal Republic of Germany was founded, and it tells us so much about this country. If you didn't hear about the group unmasking themselves, if you didn't see the pictures of the people who were killed, if you didn't hear that the police and the Office of the Protection of the Constitution had opportunities to do something about the group and didn't take them, preferring to maintain surveillance on the Nazis, meaning they just accepted that more totally normal people were going to get murdered, then for fuck's sake do me a favor and use the internet. Do a little bit of research and find out what bloody country you're living in. Take a quick look at the simplistic excuses that one informant, who was proved to be present at a murder, used to talk his way out of it, and think about whether you're convinced by he was on the phone at the time, so he didn't hear anything. Take a second to look up what the victims' relatives went through when the authorities thought the relatives themselves had done it. They knew from the beginning that it must have been racists who killed their loved one, but the rest of the world thought that that motive was somehow too far-fetched. When these losers unmasked themselves, it was a caesura, a revelation that must surely make every last one of you realize that it's not fucking sensitivities we're talking about when we talk about racism. Shame you didn't hear about it, but hey, there were probably other things that were more important to you at the time. People do have a life outside the news, you know. But then you probably also didn't hear that the trial started on Thursday in the most fucked up way it could possibly have started. And then you definitely won't have heard about all the stuff the Nazis said in their group chats. I didn't hear about that either, mind you. I'm not going to read what Nazis have written. I'm not perverse. I don't want to read it. I don't want to see it. I don't want anything to do with it. I just couldn't stop reading, said Saya. It's so ridiculous. It's so unbelievable. The way they describe their lives, the things they say about who they're going to kill when, and that they kill themselves if it all gets out. I can't stop reading it.
Thank you. So I think we picked that passage because it confronts us with all kinds of different situations in which people are engaging with knowledge that they either have heard from their friends, or like anecdotal knowledge they've heard from their friends, or chats that are being read online, or things we look up on the internet to find out more about political events. And I suppose a question that comes up in the bigger project on the political novel is, can novels teach us something about other people's experiences that we don't necessarily relate to? And I guess we're wondering whether you think that your novel has an answer to that question.
Yeah, I'm always a bit, I don't know, I'm not so cool with the idea of novels are teaching someone, because it makes me a teacher, and I'm not cool with this role somehow, because my role is more to observe and to collect, to write and to ask. And that's still a way people can learn, of course. And I'm pretty sure every book I read made me to another person, because for the time of a few pages, you are in the shoes of another person or other persons, and that changes you. Even when you know these experiences because you are sharing them, it changes something in you because you see somebody else making these experiences. So I'm pretty sure every novel can teach us something. And maybe in this abstract, it's not something we can learn or we get knowledge about this kind of terrorism, because I changed some things. So we have in Germany a huge problem with right-wing terrorists, and we had, maybe we still have, we don't know, but we know that there was this underground group, the so-called NSU, who killed several persons over the years, several most Turkish, most Greek persons. And I didn't want to serve anyone, so I didn't want to become someone who is spreading information about this group, because I think people in Germany has to know this by their own, because it's part of the German history. And so I changed some things to make it obvious that it's I'm fictionalizing it, and the point in this novel is not this group. The point in this novel is people who are living in Germany and who are not safe, because the institutions, the police, they're not saving them. They're not helping them even after cases like this. So that's something people can learn when they don't make this experience, to see, okay, I read it in the news when it was new to us, but I didn't know what it can make with people, like it makes with Saya, for example. I think this is a kind of knowledge you can get through this novel, but I refuse to give the knowledge about this right-wing terrorist groups. And I thought people get ashamed when they read this, and then they do the things Kasi is asking them to, and they do the research, and they go to internet and get all this information. But then I saw the first reviews, and I noticed, no, most of the people didn't even notice that I changed things, that there's a fictionalization about this group, about this right-wing terrorism, which was really hard, because I thought when something is happening, then people are noticing they need to know more, and then they are getting their own teachers and learning it, but it's not working like this. People still refuse to know more about this group and this violence. So it's not, it's the opposite of learning, actually, an opposite of knowledge, but yeah, just one part of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
No? Hello? Here we go. Need to hold it up a little bit. That you say that there's a kind of, a frustrating element to the reception. But we wanted to also talk about, I guess this is in some ways thinking about audience. And in that passage, we heard there's a clear shift from Kazi narrating the scene with her and Zaya retrospectively, and then turning her gaze outward, as it were, to address the implied white reader in the present tense. And Miriam and I have kind of joked about wanting to maybe write an article about the rant as literary device and how that kind of works when things shift like that. So we wondered, what was the creative thought process behind that shift in the narrative voice?
Yeah, actually we have this shift all the time. We have Kasi having monologue actually, but she feels like a dialogue to her audience, and we have the things the characters are telling us, are narrating, she's maybe repeating. But I think in this short passage, it's like somehow Kasi is supporting Saya, because Saya is the angry one. Saya isn't afraid to face people with their own racism and to talk about it very directly. Kasi is more observing, but in this case, when Saya is starting to talk about this, and Kasi knows her audience listening to Saya, she is somehow supporting her by repeating everything Saya would say, and make clear that Saya and Kasi and all the other racialized people are in one team, because they are sharing this fear and sharing this brutal experiences of knowing you're not safe. Maybe that's this point where she's talking to her audience and supporting her friend in this case.
I really like that. So actually it is about the solidarity amongst the friends rather than about the audience who might feel that they're being ranted at in that particular context. Yeah, thank you very much. Should we have the second reading now? And this is actually from slightly earlier in the book, but what's really interesting about the book is it's kind of episodic, and so there's a kind of a deliberate negation of any kind of linear narrative. And this particular scene is Kazi recalling a story of Saya's aunt's visiting.
Yeah, thank you. And it's the aunts are visiting, and it's also a situation before where Saya is trying. So she's a teenage girl, and she's at a party at a cabin, and she's trying to explain some boys, or she calls them some nerds. Kasi calls them some nerds. How racist Germany is, and they were more like, "What are you talking about?" And that's why Kasi is telling us the whole story with the aunts. And I could leave that memory at this point, because the outing my mind has just been on to the barbecue cabins of our youth has actually been pretty nice. I could just leave what happened to Saya that evening at that party there, but that wouldn't be right. Because I still have a very clear memory of one part of the discussion that Saya and the nerds were having that evening at that cabin, and so I know this was the summer that Saya began to roll the grubby word racism around her tongue when she was talking about her own experiences. And I know that this summer, because of this conversation, she stopped saying it again for a while. You see, this was the summer when Saya's aunts came to visit them in Germany. That in itself should be explanation enough. But because once again you people don't understand and always need to have things explained to you in great detail before you object, I'll take a bit more of a run-up at it. I will explain in more detail than Saya did to the nerds, so that afterwards you can't say you just didn't quite grasp the situation. So it was the summer that Saya's aunts came to visit. At this point, Saya and her parents were no longer driving to locked barbecue cabins, because by now they knew what was allowed and what was categorized as illegal, and so Saya and her aunts did normal estate things. with long walks, decadent food shopping, marathon cooking sessions, and endless communal meals. The aunts were there to see Saya and her mother and father, not to have exciting times in an exciting foreign country. In any case, they were much too old for all that. They were actually too old for this trip, full stop, as you could tell when they arrived at the airport and wanted to sit quietly in McDonald's for a bit rather than get straight in their car. The aunts were so old that everyone realized they'd traveled to Germany this time, yes, but they probably wouldn't be able to make the same journey again. Saya wasn't worked up or emotional when she and her father met the aunts at the airport with a rose for each of them. She was proud. Who else could say she'd spent her early years with 3 strong women who had now traveled specially to celebrate her 20th birthday with her? The 20th birthday thing was admittedly just what they'd put in the visa application as a suitable, innocuous reason for the trip, but Saya's birthday really was coming up, so she decided this was the truth, and in return she was going to make it her duty to look after her aunts and pay them the respect they deserved. When they got to McDonald's, the aunt sat down and Saya and her father went to place their order. Soon she was walking back towards the table in the sunny corner of the restaurant with a tray filled with fries, Coke, and a lot of ketchup. While Saya was carrying the tray, she still felt quite normal. But as she approached the table where the 3 ladies were sitting, she suddenly felt like she was stepping onto a stage. The aunts were being stared at, both by people at nearby tables and by those sitting further away. Saya distributed the cartons and fries, had kisses bestowed on her in thanks, and suddenly wanted to be somewhere else, dearly alone with her family, so that she could be pleased her aunts had come to visit without having to think about the people all around them. Over the 2 weeks that followed, she couldn't shake this feeling. They walked the footpath through the fields around the estate and strolled through silent woods, and everything would seem all right. Until a walker, a young man with a dog or an older couple with walking poles approached. Apparently, when you encountered 3 women wearing hijabs, it was compulsory to stare at them, and Saya could still feel the eyes on them long after the walkers had disappeared round the next bend. And then when Saya was out on her own, walking to school, meeting up with us in the afternoon at the deserted woodland play area, wherever she went, eyes were still looking at her. No one could see her, and yet she felt so visible. The aunts didn't seem to notice. In any case, they were too busy constantly singing Saya's praises. Thank you.
So I think the first question we had could potentially relate to other stories as well that we hear about Saya from Kasi, because as we heard before, Saya sometimes changes the stories that she tells her friends, but nonetheless in this situation we believe Kasi everything that she knows about Saya, and it's almost as if because we hear them from Kasi, we believe them because she tells us about Saya. And yeah, I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about that unreliability in a way, because sometimes Kasi is unreliable, but we do nonetheless believe her in these situations, and that tension is very interesting.
Yeah, for me it's a very strange thing that we are following unreliable narrators. So it's not a strange thing. I love the idea about it, because that's the deal about stories. You always have to trust, because otherwise you wouldn't listen. And even when you know somebody is lying, and in this case we know it very often, you still have somehow a feeling like it's worth listening more, because not everything can't be a lie. And that's also the deal with Kasi as a narrator, because she's talking about things that the mainstream, the majority, the white people, if you want so, would deny. So they would tell her, or something that always happens when minorities are starting to talk about the experiences, the majority is telling them, no, it's not that bad, you're too sensitive, or they're not saying you're lying, but they mean you're lying because they don't want to hear it. So that's why Kasi somehow is playing a game with this. She is making it very obvious we don't have a reason to trust her, but that's the deal with every story. When you want to know what's happening, you have to trust the narrator. And Saya is making a thing like this sometimes because she wants to care for her friends. She wants to protect them. So in the beginning, she doesn't want to tell a story where something bad is happening in the plane. She wants to care for Hani, who's more sensitive maybe. And that's why she's changing stories. I think that's a difference. But in this abstract, there's actually happening something similar to the other abstract. She's in a way supporting Saya in her narration. She is telling Saya's story. So we have two narrators. And that's making the story more reliable because we know they are two friends who know each other very well, and that makes it more trustworthy, I think. And on the other hand, the things she is telling us, like how 3 women wearing a hijab are looked at, 3 old women wearing a hijab sitting in McDonald's, how people are looking at them. So we all know how people are looking at them. So it's not something where we can say, oh no, that's not true, because even the people who are telling you it's not true or you're too sensitive know that it is like this.
Thank you. Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on that actually, this idea of, we were both really struck by the metaphor of the stage in this passage, when she says that she feels like she was walking onto a stage, and what that tells us about the tensions between visibility and invisibility of the characters in their social settings. This idea of a theatre of memory is something that's quite kind of current in German discourse at the moment, and theatre of integration. And so the idea that you've used this metaphor of a stage is really resonant. So yeah, maybe you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, maybe it's a metaphor in this scene, because for Saya the situation changes when she's not alone, when she is accompanied by her aunts. Yeah, it's maybe an example for the whole theater, because in a way we know who make the rules. We know who is looked at and who is talked about and who has to be criticized in a public discourse, and who is making the rules, who is outside and deciding who we are looking at. So in Germany we have every month we have a new discussion because a conservative politician is saying something controversial, I think mostly saying something very racist, and then everyone is arguing about, and we are having this huge discussion in the newspapers and social media, and in the end nothing happens, but we still normalized a racist language. And it's a game. It's actually really like a theater, because everyone has his own role. And normally we have people who are talked about who can't answer. Like, for example, one of the last big discussions, a conservative politician who talked about little pashas, like he said, the little Arabic or Turkish boys behaving like pashas. We say pasha in English as well, right? German.
Yeah.
Okay, like it's a racist construction. It's a racist construction of a, if you want, so Muslim man. And these boys can't answer, so they don't have stages, so they're just looked at, and that's the game. People who are getting objects, people who are the subjects, who are talking about them. Yeah, I think that's maybe the situation Saya is realizing. When I'm going to this table, I allow people to look at me. I'm getting visible in a way I don't want. And if I don't go there, I somehow find a way to get invisible. Maybe not, but not in this way. And that's maybe also a reason why a lot of people stay in private, don't want to go outside, don't want to get that visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're doing quite well for time, and the next passage also fits very well with that. So we'll go for the third passage that we had planned in, which is another kind of recounting of a story of an experience that Saya had, in this case at the birthday party of her, by this point, ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, and we're still in her teenage time. Like, Don't know, maybe the same age as when the aunts came, I'm not sure. She's very young, and it's her first boyfriend and a family celebration. Maybe also important to say that she's the only non-white person at the party, but that's not so important. It's a white boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. Just then, another aunt appeared at the table. "Right on time for the main course," cried Leo's mother, hugging the new aunt, who, as Leo whispered to Saya, was his mother's twin sister. But twins who, thanks to the relentlessly ticking clock, celebrated their birthdays on different days. Even so, these twins looked similar and had similar-sounding names, Birgit and Brigitte. Like Honey and Nanny, Saya thought wistfully, imagining the two of them at 13 having midnight feasts in their lovely girls' boarding school. They even looked a bit like the illustrations in Saya's Honey and Nanny books. Birgit and Brigitte both had brown hair and alert hazel eyes. After popping out onto the terrace to wave and call out, "I'll come and see you in a minute," Brigitte did the rounds of the table, hugging and kissing the other family members, the blood relatives, the relatives by marriage, the partners. When she reached a sunbed tent, hands across the table to Lena and said, "I'm Biggie," and when Lena replied, "Lena," or whatever her real name was, with a smile, Biggie beamed at her nephew Leo. "Your girlfriend," she cried, with a radiant girls' boarding school smile. "How lovely! I've heard so much about you, so much!" and couldn't stop nodding at Lena. Leo shook his head and said awkwardly, "No, Saya's my girlfriend." Biggie's smile vanished in an instant, and when Leo put his hand on Saya's shoulder and Saya instantly reached out to shake hands with Biggie like everyone else had, Biggie's confusion was still in evidence. "Do forgive me," was all she said, looking from Leo to Saya and back again until the image of the two seemed to make some kind of sense, and then she quickly added, "Lovely to meet you, Saya, and we'll catch up later, all right?" and continued her round. "And why are you taking that so personally?" I asked, the first time Saya reached this point in the story, which was in fact the end of it. We were sitting on the balcony at Hani's parents' house. They just had it built, and the balcony was different in seemingly every way from the one on the estate. But a lot of cigarettes were smoked on this balcony too, and it was now Hani as well as her parents who filled the ashtray. "I don't know," said Saya, "but it's odd, isn't it, that she assumed Leo's sister's tennis partner, who was there for no apparent reason, was Leo's girlfriend, just assumed it, even though I was sitting beside him as well." "It's not odd at all," I said. "Maybe she just didn't see you." "Of course she saw me," Saya wanted to say, but she didn't. She was as baffled as we were as to why this had annoyed her, why she'd found the situation so unsettling. She had told us because she wanted to know if she should be annoyed or just surprised. Hani said nothing, which meant she didn't know what to make of the story either. "So, from your point of view, would it have been any better," I asked when we'd sat in silence for a while, "if she'd seen you and immediately gone, 'Ah, you must be Leo's girlfriend,' although there was another girl sitting beside Leo who she also didn't know? Wouldn't she then be admitting that she'd been told you were someone unusual who she'd recognized straight off because there was no one else like you there?" Saya didn't respond. Hani said, "You two, stop it. There's nothing weird about any of this, nothing unusual. People mistake people for other people, it happens to us all. Stop moaning about things that aren't actually bad. Stop imagining things you would moan about even though they aren't bad either, just stop it." And so we did stop it. But Saya would still have the last word, because from then on, whenever the conversation turned to relationships with white men, she would start on about this birthday. She never told any other stories about Leo. She never mentioned how loyal her first boyfriend had been, or that she was the one who broke his heart, or that he now led an impeccable, unimaginative midlife class life and earned a packet working for an NGO. Leo had become a joker that Saya would play to remind us endlessly that she'd felt uncomfortable in a situation and had every right in the world to be angry about it. For me, the memory of him is thus also the memory that, as the years have gone by, I've been forced to allow Saya her anger in retrospect, through gritted teeth. Because I've since had my own experience of what happened to Saya then, of people seeing us and matching us with our people or not doing that because it didn't make sense to them that we moved in the circles we were moving in, of people addressing us in English, of people trying to explain things to us that we knew better than they did, of people asking out of the blue where we really came from, or when we were already 3 shits to the wind, asking if we drank alcohol. That was one of our favorite phases. As she got older, Saya was increasingly able to laugh at this. But she'd encountered her first one of these situations at that round number birthday, and I disagreed with her instead of saying, "You're right. Something weird did happen to you. Not bad, but weird. And things that are actually bad happen because people like us are subjected to these weird things every day without anyone questioning them." My resistance was the easier reaction, partly because Hani resisted as well. She still does, but her strength lies in not denying the truth of Saya's experience. At least she doesn't do that, and that makes her fundamentally different from the lady by the fire pit. From the lads by the fire pit, sorry. And you were right about it all, Saya. But it doesn't make someone into a living fire accelerant, does it? That's not why someone starts a war. Not then and not now. Maybe we could have listened for longer before we argued with her, Hani in her way, and me in mine. I've had to hear this story so many times, but it's only now that I'm beginning to suspect Lena, who doesn't come out of it particularly well and doesn't even have a real name, wouldn't have forgotten it either. I suspect Lena also talked to people afterwards to confirm that she had every right to be angry about being taken for Leo's girlfriend, even though she was also sitting next to Alice, Leo's sister. I'd like to tell Saya right now about this penny having dropped far too late so that we could both be ashamed of ourselves. Saya even more so than me. First, we'd be ashamed for not realizing, and then we'd feel like insensitive klutzes, and then we'd be ashamed of being the insensitive klutzes we ourselves held in such disdain. Rightly. And yet all these years, when we heard Biggie saying over and over, "Your girlfriend," I've heard so much about you, so much. We never gave a thought to Lena. Thank you. I wanted to look how to pronounce this word. I don't know. It's like klutzes, klutzes.
It was right. It was good.
It's really fun. Okay.
Yeah, so here once again we encounter Saya as the storyteller, and Kazi somewhat reflecting on the story that Saya keeps telling repetitively, and reflecting on it. And as the years go by, she discovers somewhat new meanings. She realizes that there were other people who were also whose relationships were also erased, even in Saya telling the story. So it seems that Kasi here, who is thinking about the story and listening to it again and again and trying to understand it, is somewhat finding new meanings that even the storyteller didn't know. And I guess the question we thought would be interesting to ask, do you think that the texts at some point become smarter than their authors?
Yeah, I'm really sure it is like this. I'm really, really sure, because I had so many conversations about my texts, about my novels, where people are telling me what they think about, and then they are making connections between parts of the books and between the real world, and then they are explaining things to me I didn't know. So I'm really really sure it is like this, because maybe as a writer you have something like ideas, and you're writing like I don't mean ideas like getting a clue, like ideas about the world, about people, about the way people are thinking, and about the way people are, and you're putting it in a book, and it fits in several ways, but you don't see every way, and that's why as a writer I really need conversations and connection with readers, because then I also realize what is also political about a novel, or what is my own, maybe my own feeling about the novel. And even sometimes you write things, and after a few years you understand how they are connected with yourself and how they are connected with the world. And especially when there are political issues, you're wondering sometimes how you could know things, and why did you understand it 10 years ago, but you didn't really notice that you are understanding something. But in the retrospective, you see you did understand some things, but you didn't really have the words, you had other words for it. Yeah.
Thank you. That actually, I mean, I was going to ask whether you find that writing helps you find words for things that you'd previously found difficult to describe.
Yeah, if I find ways.
Yeah, if in the writing process, so you've spoken about how that kind of happens retrospectively, but I wonder if there's kind of several stages or layers to that. Do you have that while you're writing? Do you maybe travel with your characters and gain knowledge from them as you're writing?
Yeah, definitely. For example, there is this character Hani, we did not hear so much about her, who is not denying racist experiences, but she's always finding a way to talk about them in a way they're not so bad. Or she's at one point she's saying something like, "It's hard enough to be minority, part of a minority. Don't be a crying minority," or something like this. And that's a perspective I actually don't know from real people, because my friends are not like this. But I had to find this perspective to build this character, and it's not only a perspective, it's also a strategy. And I think it's really convincing. I think you can have a better day if you see just the good things that are happening, if you're in a way trying not to get angry about all the things which makes you angry. And that's something I learned from her, actually, like just one small example. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Miriam?
I think we have time for one last question before we open up to the audience. And I think the last one we wanted to ask was about the translation process, and just asking you like how much you have been involved in that process, and was there anything that was perhaps particularly surprising to you, how the book traveled from maybe perhaps particularly from Germany into the English language?
Yeah, I'm not involved in the translation process. I think I wouldn't be a big help in it. But it's, I think almost every translation which was made of my novels, I had a moment of translators asking questions for getting sure. And it's really often the translators find mistakes in a storyline, like small ones, like, okay, but here's an uncle, and on another page you say they are no relatives or something like this. It's really interesting because the book gets read a lot before it is published, but mostly, the translators find mistakes. And yeah, there are moments of question and answering. And for me, it was really surprising when I read the first pages of the English translation, because suddenly I got this feeling like, actually, that's the right language for the narrator. It felt like more natural to hear speak English. And I was really wondering about this feeling, because I can't connect that much with foreign languages than I can connect with German. Like, German is my main tool. It's still language I can speak, and the only language I can write, and to be honest, the only language I am reading as a reader. And I was really wondering why I have this feeling like Kasi has found her language. still I've thought, yeah, because I am used to this kind of speeches, texts from the English spoken world. And in Germany, it's still kind of new to talk about racism. Or it's not new to talk about racism, but as a whole society is talking about racism, it's kind of new. And to find a way to make literature from it, it's not so common. I think that's why I thought it's somehow the right language in English. You know?
Thank you so much. So we've got about 15 minutes time for questions from the audience. And can I ask anyone who would, we've got some volunteers here to bring around microphones, but please make sure that you wait for the microphone to arrive before you start asking your questions, so that we can also make sure that our guests on Zoom can also hear. And also, if you are on Zoom and you would like to enter a question into the chat, then we've also got Elida who's monitoring the questions there. So please do put your questions there, and we will do our best to come to you as well. So does anyone have any questions? Gentleman here in the front. Thank you.
There is another category, which is creative non-fiction. And first of all, I think you'd be brilliant at that. Think of Truman Capote in Cold Blood, or even Daniel Defoe. It combines the rigid authority of journalism with the creative, poetic of the novel. Men of my age stopped reading novels 20 years ago. I just don't know any of my friends who read novels. We all read memoirs and non-fiction. But I think the area of the creative non-fiction, it's like the non-fiction is like the rods in reinforced concrete. It makes it solid. I think you'd be fantastic if you found an actual a case, and you went there, and then you put all your brilliant fiction novel in there. I'd read it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I never thought about it.
Can we recommend that you read this novel as well, because you might be surprised at how much you can learn from it to follow on from today's themes. Sarah?
Yes, what you said, Tara, I just want to say that she's astonishingly good at writing fiction. I wouldn't want her to dive off into other things necessarily, but, you know, over to you, Shida, that's your call.
Thank you.
There was a hand up at the back. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this kind of follows on from what that gentleman said over there. I'm a literature teacher, so we always get accused of overanalyzing texts. So I wonder, you spoke quite strongly about not writing to teach. You didn't want to be seen as a teacher. So I wondered, do you write with a specific purpose? And as a follower, whether you do or don't, is that a conscious decision that you make in planning or as a novel is being written? Thanks.
Thank you. I have to think. Yeah, so when I'm writing, I have the expectation that things I write are things I want to read by myself, which is kind of obvious, but it's somehow something you're sometimes losing by writing, because you're in an atmosphere of what other people could expect or how other writers decided, and do you also decide like this? And that's why I really try to focus on my own reading history and my own expectations to a novel. And I have several expectations on a novel, but they are very strict ones, like I don't want to be humiliated by a novel, and I don't want to see a book humiliating other groups. So that's like, it's not like I'm writing and I'm having rules in mind, but I'm writing and I want to be fair to all the groups I'm writing about, the groups in real world, but also the groups I am creating in the book. And maybe that is something which in the end you can say yeah, you could confuse with teaching or with rules while writing, but I'm pretty sure it's something else, but very familiar to this.
Do we have any online questions?
We've got one question here. I'll come in front of the camera from Katie Unwin. And Katie says, I think it's really convincing how different voices come through in the novel and how characters react and respond to stories. Has the novel ever been interpreted in a completely different way to how you intended? What effect do you think it has when a novel, as a stand-in for someone's life experiences, can be taken in so many different ways?
Sorry, I had to laugh. Thank you for the question, because I somehow had this memory of a TV show. Like, it's not a German, it's in Switzerland, and there are 4 professional readers, like criticus.
I know which one you're talking about. I think there were like 2 of them were like literary critics, and then they have guests as well, right?
Yeah.
And there was one politician or like an activist.
Yeah, genau, an activist from Switzerland and another writer. And I couldn't stop. I just laughed because he was saying like, so he was really offended by the book, because I think he thought that Kasi is arguing with him as a white person. Maybe she is, if he thinks so. And he was like, these are the dangerous books and something with Stalin. I just remember that he mentioned Stalin. And that was a case, I would say, he interpreted it in a different way than I would do it. Yeah, but you can, I think for me it's obvious that at first of all, when you're writing as a non-white female writer, there's always someone who is feeling addressed and provoked, and it doesn't matter what you're writing, there's always someone like this. When you're writing a book like this, of course people will get offended, and that's the deal. I think I'm not surprised by it. I was surprised that there were so many reviews who were in this who were mistaking the book as a personal affront or something like this. It was more very literal, more reviews who were which were about the literature, and that's something you have to mention, because it's not like every time like this in Germany.
There's another online audience. Yep, go ahead.
Actually, a
Go
second
ahead.
question from
Yep.
Caroline. I'm really interested in Miriam and Tara's project on ideas for a book group. Do you have any ideas for a book group based on this wonderful novel?
Well, we've actually been spent a lot of today talking about that with in a workshop on potentially producing resources for use in book groups about how to read political novels, and we had a really interesting discussion. We did a book group session on this novel, which brought up lots of different perspectives. So it's definitely we had this situation where there were. Yeah, we all read it very differently. Lots of people had very different ways of connecting with it. But at the same time, we also, through that experience, found that it can be quite triggering for some people who have experiences of the kind of things that Kasi narrates about through the group. But that also there are potential strategies, and this was one interesting question that the novel might offer for ways to deal with those, thinking about how people deal with those things. So this is a kind of a the process that we're going through at the moment is like, how can we encourage people to use books like this potentially for book groups, but also with a warning that it isn't always easy to read for people who might really kind of feel that this is kind of reflecting a lot of the things that they're kind of constantly confronted with. Does that somehow capture some of the discussions that we had?
Yeah, thank you. To the point.
This is just a question for Shida. So I happen to know that the librarian, so my son's at a secondary school in Cambridge, and their librarian is here today, but online. And I was wondering, it seemed to me that your book would be really readable by young adults. Would you see it that way as well? Is there anything in there that you would think wouldn't be suitable for young adult readers?
No, never. I trust young readers. I think they are strong. And actually, I had some readings at schools with this novel. And actually, I got the feeling like there is a new generation. I feel a bit strange to say something like a new generation, but it is like this. There's a new generation. You don't have to explain them what racism is, actually. I think they know everything. They have the words. They're not surprised. Like, you don't have this discussions, what is racism? Maybe you have, but it's not coming to their mind to discuss this. They had somehow more relations with the characters and what is happening to them and how they have feelings. I had really, really nice experiences reading this book with school classes. Yeah.
I have another question. Can I ask? And we've still got 5 minutes, haven't we? I mean, because it's kind of come up in this discussion as well, where you, I wanted to maybe ask about the role of humour in the book, because we sort of touched on it a bit in the workshop today, that there are lots of really, really difficult passages to read in this, and the kind of the overarching framework, or the kind of the surrounding framework is hard. But there are also lots of very funny parts in it, I think. I was definitely smirking a lot of the book, and I think that might be partly because I know the German context very well. But I was just wondering if you're aware of how funny you are being when you're writing.
Yeah. I never try to be funny, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be funny if I tried. But it's a strange thing that when you're writing and very concentrated, it's maybe the moments of a very short relief when you find a pointe, when you find funny moments in something.
Yeah.
Punchline,
Punchline almost. Punchline, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's somehow in a writing process. You're so focused. Sometimes you have like this really hurtful topics and this horrible history you're also dealing with. And then it's a moment of relief when you're in this creative process, you find a punchline somewhere in your head. And I'm not laughing in these moments. I'm just relieved, and then I go on with writing. And then there's sometimes these really strange moments when I'm reading my texts again and I have to laugh because then I find them. And then when I'm working on a novel with my publisher, I have to decide which jokes are not fitting in this context, because sometimes it's a relief for the reader as well, and it's such a dark humor which is somehow okay, but sometimes it's making a scene less serious, which has to be serious. So it's sometimes you have to kill your darlings and you also have to kill your punchlines.
That's quite a good line to end.
I'm sorry to do this. I'm a old competitor. I'm a French graduate and Italian, so we always competed against you lot when I was an undergraduate, the Germans lot. This is a really tedious question, so bear with me. Do you, I'm a great fan of Voltaire. Do you ever consider yourself as a political novelist in that respect? As in sort of pushing boundaries of not being inflammatory, but possibly anarchic. Do you consider yourself a political novelist?
Yeah.
Yes. And do you see yourself in the sort of, I'm trying to explain, do you see yourself as somebody who is wanting to bring about change through fiction? I know that's a broad question, but...
Yeah.
It's very, I think it's sometimes, I've got children the same age as you, who I agree that's a wonderful generation. And it's very, I'm kind of thinking more and more, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, because Voltaire, Rousseau came to England in under death threats. We saw, it's quite easy to forget the great sort of titans we see now were anarchists in their day. And I think the political novel and I think the political lexicon is the most fascinating. You'll make changes that you don't realize you're making, I would argue.
Okay, so the story, so if I think that the story can change, that the novel can change, I think writer or any artist, they shouldn't overestimate their work. And I don't think that a book can change anything, or literature can change anything, or art can change anything. But I think all these things together, all the books on the world together, every piece of art together can change people, and they can change things. So I would never say my books can change something, but I think they can have a change in people who are making the changes, maybe in this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a really good moment and point to wrap things up. So thank you again so much, Shida, for coming and being with us, and for reading, for answering everyone's questions. A round of applause for Shida.
Thank you.
Also, thank you very much to Miriam, and also to the Cambridge Capaneo team, Sarah Colvin, Charlotte Woodford, Chalawea, Melina Mandelbaum, who've been really helpful and supportive through our kind of organisation of this event. Thank you again to all of our funders, and also particularly to the German section who are sponsoring the drinks, if you're able to stay with us for a drink afterwards. And also we have Amy here from Waterstones, who's selling copies of the novel. So please support, come and buy the novel, read it. It will change you, we promise you. And Shida would be very happy to sign the copies as well. And one final thanks actually to Scribe UK, Nicola Garrison, for kind of putting us in touch and helping us get this off the ground, and to Ruth Martin, who was also important, not only in translating the book, but putting us in touch with Shida, and to our colleagues at the Goethe Institute in London, all kind of helpful in the background in helping us get this event off the ground. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, please buy the book and come and join us for a drink.